you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member, for having this important hearing. Also, I want to thank all of our witnesses today. First of all, thank you for your service to the students across this country, and thank you for being here. I have to give a special shout out to all the teaching professionals and support professionals who literally, in the drop of a dime, went from teaching in person to online learning, dealing, especially in a state like Nevada, where we saw almost a third of our students lacking devices to do distance learning. And Nevada, like many states, we're planning for drastic reduction in our state revenues at a time when we're trying to plan to get back to school in an environment where we're already dealing with overcrowded classrooms. We don't know how we're going to pay for additional transportation, continue to have high quality distance learning, which I believe needs to include some high quality professional development as well. Additional school meals. Our education shortfalls are running into the hundreds of billions of dollars. And we're already seeking cuts in Nevada, where we have an $812 million budget hole caused by coronavirus. As a result of these closures to our local businesses and losses from crucial tax sources to pay for that budget, we're looking at an anticipated $265 million projected shortfall in K to 12 funding. Uh, we know many states across this country are planning for budget cuts in the 2021 school year, but we have to be prepared to see continued shortfalls into the 21-22 short year. And it's clear that incredibly tough decisions are going to have to make. And I'd like to ask Mr. Leachman and Mr. Gorman, can you please share with the committee some of the cuts to the K to 12 education budgets that we can expect to see, including the likely impact of these cuts on programs and staff?
Sure. Thank you, Congresswoman. The first thing is because as teachers will be laid off, other school workers that are crucial to the experiences of our kids will be laid off, librarians, counselors, nurses, and others. And that will really affect the experiences of our kids. That will be the first thing because labor costs are so important. You need those people in order to properly educate our kids. But there are other things too. We won't be able to make equipment purchases that would help to improve the technology in our schools. We won't be able to make building upgrades that would help, or even keep up with the maintenance that's needed in our school buildings. We talked earlier about some of the problems with asbestos and lead in some of our schools. Those sorts of things would be put off. So all of those effects, and you can see them playing, you saw them playing out during the Great Recession. Well, this is even worse.
Thank you, Mr. Gordon.
Thank you, Congresswoman. If we saw the 25% budget reduction that we could possibly see, we would cut like we did in 2010, where at that time we closed 23 schools. We laid off over 1,000 educators at all levels of the system. We eliminated student transportation. We eliminated sports and extracurricular activities. We cut art, music, physical education, and library media out of our K-8 schools and electives out of our high schools. And we would be forced to do exactly those things again, simply keeping the lights on if we saw the worst of the cuts that we could forecast.
Thank you. Mr. Leachman, I just want to follow up on the issues I just brought up. We can look back to the Great Recession, during which Congress provided $160 billion under the Recovery Act to K to 12. This included $60 billion to K to 12 education. The CARES Act allocated $13.2 billion primarily for K to 12. Is this enough funding to meet the needs of states and school districts? And do you have any recommendations for this committee on what the CBPP believes would be an appropriate response given the circumstances that we're facing?
No, $13.2 billion is not remotely close to what will be needed. As I mentioned at the top of my testimony, we're projecting overall state-only shortfalls of $615 billion over the next 3 fiscal years. This is an extraordinary crisis. Providing way less funding that we provided during the last recession is not going to cut it. We believe that the additional amount that should be provided to states and local governments should be sufficient to meeting the shortfalls that states face. So 615 now states have received some aid, and they have some rainy day funds. But even after you use those things, overall states only face shortfalls of $440 billion. And then you add on the local government shortfalls and the other needs that we have in terms of addressing the COVID crisis. And we need to get much higher than $13 billion.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's rather clear to us that it's the discussion about letting state and local governments go bankrupt is really bankrupting the future of our children. So thank you, and I yield. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Gentlelady